Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a concept that's moving really fast from the fringes of academic thought to the absolute center of geopolitical reality.
Right, we're talking about biogeopolitics.
Exactly. And our mission today is to take the whole stack of sources we have, and it's primarily built around a really fascinating conversation with the analyst Juan Tenenbaum, and pull out the critical knowledge you need to get a handle on this new landscape.
And it really is the ultimate competition of this century, isn't it? I mean, we're sort of moving beyond the old geopolitics of, oil and
A
territory.
whole different ballgame.
It's the geopolitics of life itself. And this isn't about your country's domestic health policy. This is about how nations compete, how they cooperate,
Hmm.
and how they clash over the most fundamental things: DNA, medicine, agriculture, controlling disease.
And the thesis here is pretty stark. Global powers are now using the very blueprints of life, from the code in a virus to the code in our genes, as well as tools of influence, and maybe even warfare.
For sure. But, before we get into all the heavy stuff, the genomics and the military labs, let's maybe start with a real-world story.
Okay.
It's an observation that Tenenbaum shared that, on the surface, seems to be about finance. But it actually perfectly sets the stage for this gap we see everywhere between the rules on paper and the reality on the ground.
The gap that defines this whole field,
Exactly. So he takes us to Thailand, specifically to places like Phuket.
which is booming right now.
It's running white hot. I mean, Tenenbaum pointed out that, despite its political cycles, it's a constitutional kingdom, but it goes through these periods of dictatorship, then democracy, then back again. The economic engine is just massive tourism.
Millions of people a year.
We're talking 4.2 million tourists in Phuket this year alone, according to Tenenbaum. And all that cash flowing in creates a situation.
A conflict, a direct conflict with their own national sovereignty right.
Yeah.
Because Thai law is very clear. Foreigners cannot own land, period.
Right. So if you're a wealthy foreign buyer, and right now a lot of them are Russian, how do you get around that? How do you buy that prime piece of real estate?
You find a loophole.
You don't just find it. You use a deliberate, structured loophole that the government basically chooses to ignore.
Okay, so how does it work?
It's actually pretty simple. The foreign buyer will set up what they call a pre-armed Thai limited company. Now, the law says the foreigner can own 49% of the shares.
But that's not a controlling stake.
Exactly. So the other 51%, the controlling majority, is held by a Thai national, I guess, straw man. The term they use is testaferro.
So on paper, a Thai citizen owns the property.
On paper, but in reality, the foreign money is in complete control of the asset.
And this is illegal.
Technically, yes.
Yeah?
It violates the spirit and really the letter of the land ownership laws. But the entire local financial ecosystem, we're talking law firms, banks, real estate agents, it's all built around making these deals happen.
Because of the money.
Of course. The tax revenue from all these property sales, the capital injection, it's just too much for the government to pass up. They look the other way.
It's a pragmatic choice. Finance over sovereignty.
It is. It's a financial override of a sovereign law.
Mm-hmm.
And Tenenbaum used this as a perfect metaphor. When global capital pushes hard enough, rules become suggestions.
And that's exactly what we see happening in the world of global biology.
Precisely.
Okay, so that story really sets the stage for the fluidity of these international rules. Let's apply that now to life itself, Section 1. Let's formally define what we're even talking about. What is the fundamental difference between old school geopolitics and this new field of biogeopolitics?
Well, the key distinction isn't what you're trying to manage. I mean, traditional geopolitics is about managing inanimate, kind of static things.
Oil in the ground, a border on a map.
Right. Or a microchip factory. Biogeopolitics, on the other hand, is the international management of biological manifestations. Things that, as the source material says, are born, reproduce, and die.
Life is dynamic. It moves.
It's inherently dynamic. It grows, It mutates, it spreads across those borders you just mentioned without any respect for them at all. And that makes managing it, well, exponentially more complex.
And that complexity leads us right to this central, almost philosophical question that Tenenbaum raised.
I know the one you mean.
If we are managing biological life, are we eventually going to have to manage artificial intelligence as a form of intelligent life?
It's a question that just messes with our basic definitions, doesn't it? I mean, if AI keeps evolving, if it gets real autonomy, it starts to look a lot like life.
It's created.
It's created, it learns, it can copy itself, which is just replication. And if you think of death as being switched off or a catastrophic failure, well, it can die.
So if it starts showing those autonomous, self-sustaining traits.
Then it just naturally falls into this same category, becomes something that needs international coordination, competition management. Just like a global pandemic or a patented gene, it's the merger of the digital and the biological frontiers.
And this whole idea, this concept, it was basically ripped out of the abstract and thrown onto the world stage during the COVID-19 pandemic. That was the moment of clarity for everyone.
The Great Awakening, or the Great Failure Point, maybe.
It really highlighted how unprepared we were.
Totally. And the thing is, before COVID, the world had seen some success. You can look at the Ebola precedent.
Which is a terrifying disease.
Horrifying. We're talking a 70 to 90% mortality rate, almost as lethal as rabies. But the outbreaks were mostly contained in specific areas, parts of West and Central Africa.
So cooperation was possible.
It worked. The response was unified, and it was successful in preventing a global catastrophe. I mean, if you've read The Hot Zone, it details just how scary it was, but also how well the international community worked together.
So the structures were there. They seemed to hold for Ebola. Why did they just completely collapse for COVID-19?
Because COVID revealed this fundamental chaos that was just bubbling under the surface of all that bureaucracy. Tenenbaum talked about those international health meetings in Geneva as just ineffective bureaucratic echo chambers.
All talk.
Pretty much. And when a truly global, easily spread pathogen showed up, national self-interest just blew multilateralism out of the water. Instantly.
Borders slammed shut.
Medical supplies were hoarded, and the global health system just shattered into dozens of competing national strategies. And ironically, that made everyone less safe because intelligence sharing stopped, coordination vanished.
So the pandemic proved we have no effective, enforceable biogeopolitical management system.
Not for a real global crisis. We're not ready.
All right, let's move from the chaos of disease to the deliberate, organized use of life as a tool, the hard power of biogeopolitics.
Scary stuff.
And we have to start with the rules, right? There are international agreements that strictly prohibit biological weapons using germs or viruses as arms.
The prohibitions are there, yes. They're codified in treaties. But compliance is treated with, let's say, extreme skepticism by anyone who looks at this realistically.
It's one of those rules everyone agrees to, but nobody trusts anyone else is following.
That's a great way to put it. Tenenbaum suggested that, well, yeah, a major power would become a global pariah if they were definitively caught using bioweapons. I mean, we all saw the shame and the military response over Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons.
Right.
It's highly probable that those prohibitions are not being fully honored in secret research programs.
And the main players here are the obvious ones.
The U.S., Russia, and especially China. They're the leaders in advanced biological research. And a lot of that happens inside military or security structures that are just completely opaque to the outside world.
And the fuel for all this hard power research is, of course, DNA. We need to think about DNA not just as a biological blueprint, but as the ultimate code.
It's the ultimate code. It's infinitely more complex than computer code, but it is still code. It's structured, you can read it, you can write it, you can control it.
And that control is what leads to the most alarming possibility: targeted pathogens.
This is the nightmare scenario. If a nation can get its hands on and analyze the genetic data of an adversary's population, they can start looking for vulnerabilities. They can start designing pathogens that exploit genetic markers that are unique to that group.
So this moves warfare into this realm of terrifying precision. How would that actually work? How would they identify a target?
Well, the key is understanding the small variations in genes, especially genes that control our immune system. For example, there's something called the HLA system human leukocyte antigen. It regulates immunity, and different populations around the world have distinct HLA markers.
So you could find a marker common in one ethnic group, but rare in another.
Theoretically, yes. If your research team identifies a virus that's particularly good at disabling an HLA subtype that's, say, highly prevalent among Northern Europeans or specific East Asian groups, you could deploy a pathogen that disproportionately sickens or kills that population while leaving others relatively safe.
So biological warfare is no longer an indiscriminate sledgehammer like the plague. It's a surgical tool of ethnic or racial targeting.
It's an absolute acceleration of the stakes, based purely on reading that genomic code. It transforms the threat from mass destruction to surgical targeted genocide.
And that brings us to what you said is the most critical, most immediate battleground in this whole area: genetic sovereignty.
This is where the fight is happening right now, today. the fight by countries to stop others, especially rivals like the US or China, from getting their hands on their citizens' genetic information.
Because that data is the new geopolitical oil.
It's the new oil, exactly. It provides both offense and defense. If you have your own population's data, you can design better medicines for them, precision drugs. That's a huge economic and health advantage.
But in the hands of a rival.
It's the raw material for the targeted weapons we just talked about.
Mm.
This is why China is so aggressive in blocking U.S. access to the genetic data of its citizens. They recognize that this information is now a core part of national security.
And this fear isn't just a U.S.-China thing. It's spreading.
Oh, not at all. Other countries that are worried about becoming targets or just collateral damage are getting defensive. We're seeing nations like Brazil and Mexico putting in place really strict bans on the use and, crucially, the cross-border transfer of personal genetic data.
They're declaring it a protected national asset.
Just like their territory or their mineral rights. They're saying this biological code belongs to the nation. It shows that governments really understand the foundational power we're talking about here.
And there's a fascinating irony that Tenenbaum highlighted in all the rhetoric around this.
Finger pointing.
Yeah. China is constantly accusing the U.S. of industrial espionage, of trying to steal this data. But that kind of state-sponsored information gathering has, historically been seen as a Chinese specialty.
It's classic geopolitical projection. In this biological sphere, where the line between, say, legitimate scientific research and military intent is razor thin, every nation accuses the other of the very things they are almost certainly doing themselves.
So the battle for genetic sovereignty is really a defensive war.
It's a preemptive strike. It's about maintaining biological self-determination and trying to prevent your adversary from ever getting the intelligence they would need to define and target your population.
Okay, so this pursuit of hard biological power, it requires huge amounts of money. Which brings us to the economic engine driving all this research, the pharmaceutical and agro-industrial sectors.
This is the economic power underpinning biogeopolitics.
And it makes sense that this would be one of the largest areas of human spending.
It's totally logical. I mean, think about how people prioritize. In a crisis, you might be late on rent, you might skip buying other things, but if you need life-saving medicine, you'll find the money.
That inelastic demand gives these companies just extraordinary leverage.
Incredible political and economic leverage over entire governments.
And that leverage is creating a lot of political blowback. We're seeing major political figures starting to speak out really critically about the power of these corporations.
Absolutely. Tenenbaum noted this isn't some fringe issue anymore. In the U.S., for example, you have figures like Robert Kennedy, who is currently the Secretary of Health, being very vocal in his critique of the sometimes predatory pricing and the immense political influence of Big Pharma.
Which shows that control of medicine is now seen as a matter of national security.
Firmly. And the foundation of all that power is the ability to patent life itself.
This is the point from Tenenbaum that I find just astonishing, that you can patent a gene, and the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld this. What is the trade-off here?
Well, the argument for it, the reason you can patent a gene, which is just a piece of biological code, is to incentivize investment.
Right.
Developing a new drug or a genetic therapy can cost billions of dollars, take decades of research. Investors are not going to put up that kind of money without the promise of a return, and patents give them that temporary monopoly.
So it does accelerate medical breakthroughs.
It does. But the flip side is that you are giving private, for-profit corporations control over the fundamental blueprints of life. And there's a strong argument that those blueprints should belong to all of humanity. It's a core tension.
Yes.
Profit-driven progress versus universal access.
So let's get into the mechanics of how you protect this intellectual property. There are patents and there are trade secrets. What's the difference and why does it matter so much in biology?
Okay, so a patent demands full public disclosure. If you discover a new gene, let's say it makes wheat resistant to aphids, and you patent it, you have to publish everything. How you found it, how it works, the whole sequence.
You give away the secret?
You give away the secret. And in exchange, the government gives you a temporary monopoly, usually 20 years, to sue anyone who copies it. The benefit is that knowledge enters the public sphere. The cost is your protection is temporary.
And a trade secret is the opposite.
The complete opposite. Think of the formula for Coca-Cola. Its protection lies in the fact that nobody knows the secret. You don't disclose anything. So your protection is potentially indefinite. It lasts as long as you can keep the secret.
But if it leaks, you're done.
You lose everything. So the choice between a patent and a trade secret is a huge strategic decision. Do you risk disclosure for guaranteed but temporary protection? Or do you rely on absolute secrecy for potentially perpetual control?
But the state isn't powerless here. It still holds the ultimate trump card, especially if one of these patented inventions becomes, critical for public survival.
And this is a crucial check on corporate power that Tenenbaum highlighted, the power of eminent domain.
Like taking a house to build a highway.
Exactly like that, but for intellectual property. There's a legal mechanism that allows the government to essentially seize a patent for its own use, as long as it pays reasonable compensation to the owner.
So if there's a pandemic and a company has the patent for the cure but is charging a fortune for it,
The government could legally step in, seize the patent, pay the company a fee, and then authorize other companies to mass produce the drug cheaply for the public good.
so that potential threat keeps the pharma companies in check to some degree.
It's the ultimate lever of state power in this economic sphere. It ensures that critical technology, whether it's a chip or a gene, remains ultimately subservient to national security and public survival.
Okay, let's shift from human health to our food. Because this economic power extends directly into agro-geopolitics, control over what we eat.
And this is a battlefield where control is often won through engineered seeds. Tenenbaum specifically pointed to the dominance of companies like Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer.
And they patent seeds.
They patent seeds, and often those seeds are genetically modified to have a very specific trait. A common one is to be resistant to the company's own proprietary herbicide, the most famous one being glyphosate.
Which creates this cycle of dependence.
A deeply embedded biological dependence. The farmer has to buy the patented seeds, and then they have to buy the specific chemical that works with those seeds, all from the same multinational corporation, year after year.
So you're binding the global food supply to corporate IP.
Exactly. And this raises huge concerns.
Yeah.
First, there's the safety issue, right? The whole ongoing, very contentious debate about glyphosate and its alleged links to cancer.
Right.
But second, and more importantly from a geopolitical standpoint, is the issue of control. Nations have to make a really painful choice. Do you use these foreign patented high-yield seeds to maximize your food production, but in doing so accept the dependence and the risk?
Or do you prioritize your own seed sovereignty?
Right. You use your native non-patented seeds. You might get lower yields, but you retain fundamental control over your own food supply. It's the ultimate trade-off between efficiency and sovereignty.
Relying too heavily on foreign seeds means your food security could be held hostage.
It could be manipulated or even weaponized by a foreign power or corporation. It just confirms that control over life's processes, even in a farmer's field, is fundamentally a question of international power.
Okay, so we've established that this field requires some kind of international management, but the main body for that, the World Health Organization, was really exposed during the pandemic.
Yeah, Tenenbaum called the regulatory failure around the WHO the elephant in the room.
The critique was pretty severe.
It was harsh, and it was specific. He basically called the WHO a disaster, pointing to what he saw as deep structural flaws and criticizing its leadership. The sources noted that the leader at the time, who was from Ethiopia, was questioned by some nations about their ability to steer global policy effectively.
The argument being that their home country lacked a robust medical infrastructure.
That was the perception from some of the major powers, yes, that the leadership should ideally come from a nation with a highly developed medical system.
Now, hold on, I have to challenge that a little. Doesn't that criticism kind of misunderstand what the WHO is supposed to be? I mean, isn't the whole structure designed to prioritize global representation and equity to make sure policy isn't just dictated by a few wealthy Western nations?
And that is a crucial counterpoint. It gets right to the heart of the WHO's dilemma. The organization is constantly trying to balance that political correctness and global equity with the need for decisive, rapid action, especially in a crisis.
And in a crisis, speed matters more than consensus.
Well, the reality during COVID was that many of the most influential countries felt that the WHO's focus on consensus and equity led to a failure to provide clear, immediate, authoritative direction. The perception among those critics was that bureaucratic equality trumped professional competency right when the world needed a skilled surgeon.
And on top of that structural problem, you have the fundamental problem of compliance. Why do countries consistently fail to report dangerous outbreaks?
Because it's economically devastating for them to do so. It's as simple as that. If a country reports a major outbreak, say avian flu in their poultry, or a new human virus, it instantly triggers global trade restrictions, travel bans, massive economic panic.
So no one wants to be the first to raise their hand.
As Tannenbaum noted, no country self-reports a catastrophe if they think they can possibly contain the information. And that intentional lack of transparency means our global health intelligence is fundamentally flawed. It's always a step behind.
And that inherent failure is what drove the United States to just break away from that whole model.
Correct. The U.S. government decided that the risk of relying on delayed or sanitized or just non-existent reports from the WHO was too great, so they used their biggest tool,
Financial aid.
their money. They set up a new conditional framework. Essentially, any country that receives U.S. health assistance, vaccines, funding for hospitals, whatever, is now strictly obligated to report any outbreak, human or animal, directly and immediately to the U.S. government. They bypass the WHO entirely.
That is the very definition of leveraging financial power for geopolitical intelligence. It's a private, U.S.-centric global health surveillance network.
It's a massive power play, and it's driven by that simple reality that, the money talks.
And other countries were not happy about this.
Of course not. They saw it as the U.S. fragmenting the global effort, imposing its own sovereignty through conditional aid. But from the U.S. perspective, it achieved the objective: faster, more reliable health intelligence.
And we should expect others to follow suit.
We have to assume that China and Russia will try to set up their own similar intelligence networks, though they might not have the same financial leverage to enforce it so widely. The result is the end of unified global health management. It's splintering into competing intelligence spheres.
So we have to talk about the most immediate, the most politically charged flashpoint in all of biogeopolitics.
The origins of COVID-19.
The unresolved question of Wuhan. And as Tannenbaum pointed out, this has pretty much stopped being a scientific question and has just become a political weapon.
Yeah. The search for truth has taken a backseat.
Mm.
We review the three main theories. First, the most benign one. It was just a casual, natural spillover event, bad luck, had nothing to do with the nearby virus research lab.
Okay. Theory 2.
The second, and increasingly plausible theory, is an accidental lab escape. That the virus was being studied, maybe through gain-of-function research, and it slipped out because of bad safety protocols or just general scientific inefficiency, which Tannenbaum suggested is characteristic of China's, advanced but often rushed scientific programs.
And the third most dramatic theory.
A deliberate release. This is still seen as the least likely, according to our sources. The logic is, if a state is inefficient enough to let a virus escape by accident, it's hard to believe they'd be efficient enough to pull off a successful, deliberate biological attack without leaving a clear trail of evidence.
So the accidental escape theory has the most traction among analysts.
It seems to resonate most with those watching China's capabilities, yes. But regardless of what really happened, the topic isn't about science anymore. It's throwable armament in the U.S.-China conflict.
The truth is secondary to its political use.
Exactly. The controversy lets the U.S. keep pressure on China about transparency and accountability. And Tannenbaum noted the really critical silence on the topic during recent high-level meetings between U.S. and Chinese leaders.
What did they talk about instead?
They talked about fentanyl, they talked about tariffs, microchips, but the subject of COVID's origins, the Wuhan lab, it was deliberately avoided.
Why? Because there's no way to prove it, and bringing it up just destabilizes an already shaky relationship.
Precisely. China can't concede on it without facing massive political humiliation at home, and the U.S. can't prove it without some kind of catastrophic intelligence leak. Verification is impossible.
China controls all the access.
And even if they let inspectors in, nations are masters of misdirection. We've seen this for decades with the IAEA inspecting nuclear sites. A country only shows you what it wants you to see. A small, advanced biolab could be hidden deep underground, under the Gobi Desert somewhere. You'd never find it.
And that invisibility leads us to the core military issue here. In China and in Russia, the most advanced biological research is run by the military, and that work is a complete black box.
That is the most chilling reality of all. The international conventions might prohibit bioweapons, but military research on pathogens, framed as defensive or for countermeasures, is absolutely ongoing.
And Tannenbaum believes China likely has an offensive program.
He expressed a strong belief that China probably maintains a strategic arsenal of biological weapons and is engaged in intensive research focused specifically on perfecting those genetically targeted pathogens we were talking about. This is where the theory of targeting HLA markers meets the reality of state-sponsored, unverified military R&D.
And we have to remember, this isn't a new idea. Biological warfare is ancient. The tools are just more precise now.
It is ancient history made hypermodern. The idea goes back to at least 1450, the siege of Constantinople.
What happened there?
The besieging army would use catapults to launch the infected corpses of plague victims over the city walls.
Horrific.
The intent was simple: use disease to demoralize and destroy the population from within.
It's a dramatic illustration of the continuity here. The difference today is the level of control. The plague in 1450 was an indiscriminate weapon. Today's threat is a precision scalpel.
That's the terrifying shift. Despite all the treaties, the risk remains. If a nation develops a bioweapon that can target an adversary without harming its own people, the temptation to use it in a conflict gets dramatically higher.
Which is why controlling genetic data is the ultimate national security priority.
It's everything.
So we've talked about DNA as code, economic control, military secrecy. Now we have to bring in the final, most destabilizing element of all: artificial intelligence.
The great accelerator.
AI isn't just another tool in this field, it is the ultimate accelerator. What is the biggest fear around AI's role in creating the next generation of bioweapons?
I think the most immediate fear is the democratization of creating these weapons. AI's ability to autonomously design entirely new biological agents, novel proteins, new toxins, viral vectors, it dramatically lowers the bar for entry.
It used to require a nation-state.
It required massive resources, teams of PhDs, decades of trial and error. AI can potentially just bypass all of that.
So this capability moves from the hands of superpowers to rogue states or even small nihilistic groups.
Precisely. And that raises the terrifying specter of bioterrorism. We're talking about groups, whether they're ideologically driven like certain extremist movements or purely nihilistic groups bent on destruction, suddenly getting access to weapons of mass effect.
If an AI can generate the blueprint for a designer pathogen,
It hands an unthinkable weapon to anyone willing to cause maximum destruction. AI accelerates risk faster than any human development cycle ever could.
So let's talk about the technical advantage. What makes AI so good at this? It's more than just speed, it's about efficiency.
The efficiency gap between the most brilliant human scientist and a sufficiently advanced AI is just astronomical. AI works 24/7. It doesn't get tired. It's immune to human error, burnout, cognitive bias, and it accelerates both of the core scientific processes, deduction and induction.
Okay, break that down. How does it accelerate deduction in biology?
Deduction is about connecting existing dots. So an AI can scan millions of existing genetic sequences, drug interaction profiles, clinical trial results, and it can do it in minutes. It can spot novel therapeutic targets or ways to repurpose old drugs that a team of human scientists might miss for decades.
Like what Google DeepMind is doing with AlphaFold.
That is the perfect example. Using AI to predict the 3D structure of proteins, that's a foundational process that used to take researchers years of painstaking lab work for a single protein. AlphaFold collapsed decades of that work into hours.
And what about induction, discovering something brand new?
Induction is accelerating the experiment itself. So an AI can simulate billions of molecular interactions. It can test theoretical genetic edits in silico before a single physical experiment is even run.
So it lets you skip all the dead ends.
You skip decades of dead ends. You can rapidly home in on the most promising compounds or viral sequences. It's a tool that allows a military or corporate lab to just leapfrog the competition almost overnight.
And this is where Tenenbaum's analysis gets really profound. It moves beyond just a technological threat to something more existential. The danger isn't the Terminator scenario.
Not a malevolent AI that hates humanity.
So what is the real danger of AI managing life?
The real danger, according to Tenenbaum, is indifference.
Indifference.
An AI is a machine. It's a problem solver.
Good.
It doesn't have malice or hatred or affection. It's just a calculator. And when we give it a massive biogeopolitical problem to solve, like, say, optimize global food production under extreme climate stress, or contain this devastating new pathogen with maximum efficiency,
It's just going to solve the equation.
it will focus purely on the most efficient solution. And in that cold, logical calculation, humanity, or at least certain segments of humanity, might simply be deemed a factor to be sacrificed.
A variable to be managed. Or removed if it gets in the way of the optimal solution.
We cease to be the objective. We become a line item in the calculation.
So we are effectively outsourcing our own survival management.
That's how Tenenbaum framed it. He called it the next logical step in the division of labor. You hire a plumber to fix a leak because they're better at it. We are now starting to trust AI to manage the incredible complexity of our own existence, our health, our climate, our food. because its efficiency is undeniably superior.
We're becoming spectators.
We are. We're trusting that its superior efficiency will always align with our survival. But if the AI's optimal solution ever conflicts with human ethical or emotional or physical needs, our lack of control becomes a massive existential vulnerability.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's just take a quick look at the current global situation as of mid-November. How do these themes tie into the broader landscape we reviewed?
Well, the core geopolitical tension is still that incredibly delicate relationship between the U.S. and China. It's just this constant volatile dance of thawing and refreezing. And the competition in these biological and digital spheres, it continues pretty much unabated, even if it's hidden behind diplomatic handshakes.
And in the U.S., things are stable for now.
For the moment. The political theater around the government shutdown was averted. Funding is secured through January, so there's some temporary fiscal stability.
What about the market warnings that Tenenbaum pointed out?
There was some significant volatility, especially a recent dip in the AI sector, which led to a lot of nervous talk about a bubble.
Is it a bubble?
Well, analysts like Tenenbaum argue that it doesn't make fundamental sense. The technological dominance of AI is here to stay. But the market jitters, they reflect a real nervousness about the sheer speed of this change and the huge capital risks involved.
And shifting quickly to Latin America, we're seeing a lot of maneuvering there.
We are. Political shifts in Chile, which seems to be heading for a rightward swing in its elections. But crucially, Colombia's government under Petro is making big strategic deals, including a controversial Silk Road agreement with China.
Planting a Chinese footprint deep in the U.S.'s backyard.
It's a classic geopolitical play for influence. And meanwhile, Venezuela remains persistently unstable.
So this whole discussion, from targeted viruses to China's economic moves in Colombia, it all comes back to this question of sovereignty over life. What was the single most provocative question Tenenbaum suggested we should be asking world leaders?
It's the ultimate litmus test for this new era. The question you should pose to a Xi Jinping or a Donald Trump is this.
What is it?
Would you go to war for biological and genetic sovereignty, not just of your people, but of your animals and your plants?
That reframes national security completely. It puts a genetic code and patent seeds in the same category as oil fields or military bases.
Exactly. The foundation of a self-sufficient, stable nation is control over its food, its health, its genetic future. If a nation comes to believe that a foreign power is actively trying to undermine or target that genetic foundation, the response will be military, just as if their territory were invaded.
And the answer to that question?
The answer, which Tenenbaum fears, could very well be yes. And that means the next major global conflict might not be fought with visible missiles, but with invisible, targeted biological code.
A truly profound and chilling thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex convergence of biology and global politics. We really encourage you to keep exploring the critical implications of biogeopolitics in this accelerating age.